The delicate silver chain slithered through my fingers like a cold, metallic serpent, finally dropping the heavy, heart-shaped locket into my palm. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. It was Isabella's. Unmistakably. The intricate filigree, the small, flawed sapphire set in its center. A piece she always called her humble treasure. I'd found it nestled in the crevice of a shattered piece of the car's dashboard. A relic that had somehow survived the crushing impact and the subsequent 7 years in a police evidence warehouse. I had come here today on a whim. A final, morbid act of closure before the last of Liam's things were officially disposed of. I thought I was strong enough. I was wrong. The locket felt like a live wire in my hand, sending jolts of a memory I couldn't place through my system. It wasn't just its presence that was wrong, it was its condition. While everything else from the wreck was twisted, scorched, and stained by the elements, the locket was only lightly tarnished, as if it had been protected, hidden away in that specific spot, not exposed to the violent fury of the crash and the subsequent fire. My name is Elara, and for 7 years, my life had been defined by a single shattering event. The night my husband Liam's car flew off the cliffside road at Hawks Point Cove. The official verdict was accidental death, due to adverse weather conditions. I had built a fragile peace on that verdict, a life of quiet resignation. Now, with the cold weight of that silver heart in my hand, the foundation of that peace splintered into 1,000 jagged pieces. My father, Robert, and my stepmother, Isabella, had been my pillars. In the suffocating fog of grief, they were my handlers, my interpreters for a world that had suddenly stopped making sense. Isabella, especially. She was the one who had taken charge, her cool efficiency a stark contrast to my paralyzing despair. She had arranged the funeral, her taste impeccable, her composure unshakable. She had dealt with the police, the lawyers, the well-meaning friends. She had guided me through the labyrinth of Liam's estate, her hand steady on my trembling shoulder. "Let us help you, darling," she'd cooed. "You shouldn't have to bear this alone. Your father and I will manage everything. It's what family is for." Now, those words curdled in my memory, taking on a new, sinister meaning. A memory, sharp and clear, pierced through the haze of the past few weeks. It was about a month after the funeral. We were in the study of my father's grand, cold house. Isabella was pouring a glass of expensive brandy for my father, her movements graceful and precise. "The life insurance has cleared," my father had said, his voice gravelly with a stress I had mistaken for shared grief. "And the probate on Liam's company shares is almost complete. Elara, you'll be a very wealthy woman." Isabella had placed a comforting hand on my arm. "Wealth comes with responsibility, my dear. The market is so volatile. Robert has some excellent, stable opportunities. We can consolidate everything, make it easier for you. You shouldn't have to worry about these tedious details." At the time, I'd been numb, grateful for their intervention. Now it sounded like a corporate takeover. Liam had been a visionary, a tech entrepreneur whose AI-driven logistics software had revolutionized a niche market. His company, Ethereum, was his life's work. He was cautious, brilliant, and deeply principled. I remembered arguments, tense, hushed conversations between him and my father. My father, a property developer with a taste for grandiose, high-risk projects, had been trying to get Liam to invest a significant portion of Ethereum's capital into a massive new venture he was spearheading, a sprawling mixed-use development called the Apex. Liam had refused. He'd called the project ethically dubious and financially reckless. He didn't trust my father's partners, a shadowy consortium of international investors. Liam's refusal had created a rift. A coldness had settled between us and my parents for those few months before his death. A coldness that had miraculously thawed the moment I became a widow and the sole inheritor of Liam's fortune. I couldn't confront them. Not with a feeling, not with a locket. I needed proof. I started to dig, my hands shaking as I typed passwords into Liam's old laptop, which I'd kept in a box, unable to part with it. I began with the police report. A friendly, sympathetic paralegal named Maya, a college friend I'd reconnected with, managed to get me a full copy. It was as sterile and inconclusive as I remembered. But Maya, with a keen eye for detail, pointed something out. Look at this, Elara. The witness statement from a truck driver, a Mr. Evans. He reports seeing a dark sedan, maybe a BMW or a Mercedes, following a car matching Liam's Alfa Romeo very closely, almost aggressively, just minutes before the estimated time of the accident. He said the sedan's driving was erratic. A Mercedes? I whispered, my blood running cold. My father drove a black Mercedes S-Class. And here, Maya continued, her finger tracing a line of text. The responding officer notes a minor, recent scuff mark and a transfer of dark paint on Liam's rear bumper. It was deemed insignificant, probably from a minor parking lot incident. It was never analyzed. A dark sedan. A paint transfer. A witness. This wasn't in the summary I'd been given 7 years ago. This had been buried, overlooked. My investigation into my father's business was like trying to navigate a maze in the dark. He was a master of obfuscation, his company, Stonehaven Developments, a complex web of LLCs and holding companies. But I was Liam's wife. I'd learned a thing or two about research and following money trails. Late one night, fueled by a potent mix of dread and black coffee, I found it. An article in a local business journal, dated 8 months after Liam's death. Stonehaven's the apex project saved by last-minute capital injection from Orion Ventures. Orion Ventures. The name rang a faint, distant bell. I dove back into my own financial records, the ones Isabella had so helpfully consolidated for me. There it was. A series of transfers from my inheritance, guided by my father's financial advisor, into a diversified portfolio. A significant portion had been placed into a fund called Pegasus Growth. It took me 3 more hours of cross-referencing corporate registries to discover that Pegasus Growth was a majority stakeholder in Orion Ventures. The room spun. My father's failing project, the one Liam had refused to bankroll, had been saved by my money. My dead husband's money. The timeline was a perfect, horrifying lockstep. Liam's refusal, his death, my inheritance, the transfer of funds, the salvation of the apex. It couldn't be a coincidence. It was a blueprint for murder. The thought of Isabella's role in this made my skin prickle with a fresh wave of fear. Her control hadn't started with Liam's death. It had been a slow, insidious process my entire adult life. She'd subtly criticized my friends, my choices, my career as a freelance illustrator. "So unstable, darling," she'd say. "You should let your father find you a proper position in his company." She'd been systematically isolating me, making me more dependent, more pliable. I had thought it was overbearing, smothering love. Now I saw it for what it was, grooming. She was preparing her asset. Driven by a desperation I could no longer contain, I sought out a man named Mr. Croft, the private investigator my father had hired, and then abruptly fired. In the days immediately following the accident, I found him in a dusty, book-lined office that smelled of old paper and regret. "Ah, the Morgan case," he said, his eyes sharp and bird-like, studying me. "I wondered when you might come. The case was closed too neatly, Ms. Elara. Too quickly. There was pressure from influential parties. My father? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. He hired me to find evidence of driver error, anything to support the accident theory. But what I found, it pointed elsewhere. The tire marks at the scene. They weren't consistent with a simple loss of control. They indicated a sharp impact from the side rear quadrant. A classic pit maneuver technique. It requires skill, precision. My father raced cars in his youth, I said, the words tasting like ash. Indeed, Croft replied softly. But my preliminary report was dismissed. I was paid handsomely for my silence and let go. There was another thing, something I never even wrote down. The tow truck driver who recovered the vehicle mentioned something odd to me. He said when they winched the wreckage up, a small, shiny object fell from the undercarriage. He thought nothing of it at the time. He described it as a piece of jewelry. The locket. It hadn't been inside the dashboard. It had been caught in the undercarriage. It must have snagged on something during the impact that sent Liam over the cliff. It was physical proof that Isabella's locket was at the scene of the crime. The pieces were assembling into a monstrous whole. But I needed irrefutable evidence. I needed a confession. The opportunity came with their annual pilgrimage to our family's coastal cottage, a trip they took to honor the memory of my biological mother. The irony was a bitter pill. With a key I'd copied years ago and a heart pounding like a war drum, I let myself into the suffocating silence of their home. I bypassed the ostentatious living rooms and went straight to my father's study, his inner sanctum. It was a temple to his own success, filled with awards and models of his developments. I searched for hours, my nerves fraying with every passing minute. The filing cabinets yielded nothing but sanitized corporate records. It was only when my desperation peaked that I noticed it. A single, out-of-place volume on his shelves. A first-edition copy of The Great Gatsby. My father never read fiction. He called it unproductive. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. It was heavier than it should have been. I opened it and found the pages had been hollowed out. Inside lay a single unlabeled USB drive. Back in the safety of my apartment, with Maya as my witness, I plugged it in. It was encrypted, but the password was tragically my birthday. The contents were a damning chronicle of their guilt. Spreadsheets showed the funneling of my money into the apex. There were emails between my father and his project manager, discussing the urgent capital requirement and the imminent collapse. And then there were the audio files. I clicked on the first one. The timestamp was the day after Liam's funeral. My father's voice, thick with tears and what I now recognized as guilt, not just grief. My God, Isabella, what have we done? He was a good man. He was her husband. Isabella's voice was a whip crack of cold fury. He was an obstacle, Robert. A sentimental fool who would have watched you drown. You were days from bankruptcy, from total ruin. The banks were calling in their loans. This wasn't just about money. It was about survival. Your survival. Our survival. That money is now secure. It's back in the family, under our control. We will guide Elara. We will help her through this. And we will never, ever speak of this again. It was an accident. Do you understand me? An accident. There was another file, dated a week later. They were in the study. I could hear the clink of a glass. It was too clean, Isabella, my father muttered, his voice slurred. The police, they just accepted it. What if they look closer? They won't, she said, her tone utterly calm. I had a long conversation with the deputy chief. He understands the importance of stability, of not creating a scandal that would harm the city's business interests. Your interests. The case is closed. But the car, the modification. What if someone finds? Nobody will find anything. Isabella cut him off, her patience thinning. It was a simple mechanical failure. A worn-out brake line. It happens all the time. It's tragic, but it's simple. Now drink your brandy and pull yourself together. We have a grieving daughter to care for. The final audio file was the shortest and the most devastating. It was just my father, alone, muttering to himself. A soliloquy of despair recorded by a hidden device Isabella must have used to ensure his compliance. His words were barely audible, soaked in self-loathing. Just a small cut. Just enough to leak. He'd lose pressure, have to pull over, a scare, that's all, just a scare to make him listen. But the hill, the curve, I didn't know. I didn't know he'd lose it completely. Oh God, forgive me. Elara, my little girl, what have I done? I vomited. The physical reaction was instantaneous and violent. Maya held my hair, her own face pale with horror. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was a concrete, auditory nightmare. My father had deliberately severed Liam's brake line. He had intended to cause a minor accident, a frightening but non-lethal event to force Liam into compliance. But his miscalculation had sent my husband to his death. And Isabella, the architect of this plan, had covered it up, manipulating the investigation and my life with chilling precision. Going to the police was the hardest thing I've ever done. Handing over the USB drive felt like handing over my own heart. The ensuing investigation was a media firestorm. Prominent developer implicated in son-in-law's murder. A twisted tale of greed and betrayal. My face was splashed across the news, the pale, haunted daughter who had brought down her own family. The trial was a protracted, public evisceration. I had to sit in that sterile courtroom and listen to the defense attorneys paint Liam as reckless, my father as a tragic figure pushed to the brink, and Isabella as a devoted wife and mother. But the evidence was undeniable. The audio recordings were played for the jury, my father's broken confession echoing in the silent room. The financial trail, meticulously mapped by the prosecution, was a roadmap of greed. Isabella never flinched. She maintained a mask of dignified outrage, her eyes cold and accusing whenever they met mine. She was a statue of self-righteousness. Even when the jury pronounced her guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and grand larceny. My father, when his verdict was read, guilty of second-degree murder, simply crumpled. The facade of the powerful businessman dissolved, leaving a broken, weeping old man. At the sentencing, the judge allowed victim impact statements. I stood, my legs threatening to buckle, and faced the two people who had defined so much of my life. I looked at my father first. You were my hero, I began, my voice trembling but clear. You taught me to be brave. And then you showed me the most profound cowardice imaginable. You took the love of my life, my future, my happiness, for the sake of a building, for money. You have to live with that. And so do I. Then I turned to Isabella. She stared back, her expression one of pure, unadulterated contempt. You, I said, my voice steadying with a cold fury. You didn't just take Liam from me. You stole my grief. You perverted it, used it as a tool to control me. You held me while I cried for the man you had killed. There is no word for that kind of evil. You are a void where a human being should be. I hope the silence in your cell is deafening. She said nothing. She simply turned her head away, as if I were beneath her notice. They were both sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the end, I stood on the steps of the courthouse, the flashes of cameras popping around me. The justice system had given me its answer, but it offered no solace, no peace. The victory was hollow, carved out of the ruins of my entire life. A few weeks later, I mustered the courage to visit my father in prison. He was dressed in a drab jumpsuit, his posture defeated. "Elara," he whispered, his voice raspy. I'm so sorry. I never meant. I loved you. I love you still." I looked at him through the thick, scarred plexiglass. This man who had given me life and then had destroyed it. "You loved the idea of me," I corrected him, my voice eerily calm. "The daughter who would inherit your empire. You loved what I represented. But you didn't love me enough to protect my happiness. You don't get to talk about love. Not to me. Not ever again." I didn't wait for a response. I placed the handset back in its cradle and walked away. I walked out of the prison, out of the shadow of my family's legacy, and into an uncertain future. The road ahead was mine alone to walk. It was terrifying. But for the first time since I found that damned locket, it was paved with truth. And in that truth, however painful, there was a seed of something I hadn't felt in years. A fragile, tentative sense of freedom.